wanted to get to Chinley from Dore by rail in the 1880s, it was a bit of a trek. First, you had to get to Sheffield, then change to the Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway to Manchester, and then board a train to Chinley Station. For a 23-mile trip, it was an awfully long way around. In the age of the railway, it seemed obvious to put in a station between these two villages. Both were on the outskirts of large cities, and both were decent enough a size to warrant station, but the land that sat between them wasn't the best for taking on the railways. In fact, Totley Moor was one of the worst terrain to put in an overground line. But if the moor was going to be a problem, why put in a railway at all to save a few hours? The village of Dore and the village of Chinley are very similar. Both sit on the edges of very large industrial cities. Both sit on the edges of prime land. And both, thanks to the railways, have seen their land prices soar ready for development. The opening of other railways such as the Chesterfield and Sheffield Railway had brought the population to the area. With this bolstering a new business, it was felt a more direct route was needed between the two growing towns. Once the line was finalised and the route agreed, the Midland Railway got to work. The first task is tackling the moor. They couldn't go over it, so it was decided to go under it. Two contractors would be given the green light for carrying out the work, and the design for the tunnel was led by Thomas Horsham. To get the correct line, 3 sighting points were established, and a device called a theodolite was used. Once the correct line was made, shafts along the line were dug down from ground level to an agreed depth. This agreed depth would be where the rails would sit. Then the men would widen the shafts at the bottom to connect them. There would be 2 teams, each starting from each end of the tunnel, with them both meeting in the middle. Considering the lack of modern-day tools and equipment, it was a monumental achievement that throughout the entirety of the 3.5-mile tunnel length, it was established that when the 3.5-mile tunnel was connected, their measurements were only out by 4.5 inches. To allow for good ventilation and for the removal of waste material from the tunnel's construction, 4 permanent shafts were sunk in and positioned every 3/4 of a mile. Shaft A was of particular importance as it was also the home of the main pumping station, keeping the tunnels dry. On the 9th of February 1889, work was progressing at a rapid rate. As well as the tunnels, Dore Station had been given an upgrade too, with a new signal box and new sidings, and a new cutting had been dug, leading the way to Totley Rise. Meanwhile, steam cranes were deployed in removing the tons of waste from the shafts. As the workload increased, so did the number of workers arriving to the site. To accommodate, a number of huts were erected, and the local brickworks had completed a small tramway to the tunnel from its brickyard, ready to deliver the millions of bricks the tunnel would soon be needing. But things were not going smoothly. The railway saw a small walkout over the increase of wages and struggling to make up numbers. A young assistant to one of the engineers had been killed in a railway accident, and an outbreak of typhus within the workforce all threatened the completion of the project. Inside the tunnel, the work was unbearable. The work was undertaken by navvies. Workers would bring their families, and the railway, like many other railways of the time, offered the workers the very basic of amenities. Families would stay in temporary wooden fashion huts, up to 20 at a time, and safety was far from the railway boss's mind. Many men were killed in the tunnel's construction, and like many railways, it was estimated that many accidents were hushed up and glossed over. Disease ran rife, and there were outbreaks of cholera and smallpox. It was cold and wet in the winter, and dangerously hot in summer. The stench was awful, and while the men were only working by dim lamplight, they had to be on constant alert for the workmen's trains that would go up and down the sections of the track. Blasting got rid of stubborn rock, but that in itself brought severe danger of collapse. One local reporter on site of the construction likened to the swing of the pickaxe to Moses, as each time the men struck the earth, water sprung forth. To shore up the walls, block masonry bricks were used in variety of thicknesses. There were recesses in the walls at intervals where people could duck into if needed, and the cement was used to cover any gaps. It's estimated that over 33 million bricks were used in the tunnel. At last, with that final brick lining completed, the tunnel was declared complete and the permanent way was put in on the 22nd of September 1893. It was estimated that the tunnel cost around £80 per yard to complete. The railway was completed by November 1893 and opened to the public the following May. The Midland Railway was pleased with the work and awarded bonuses to the contractors in thanks to completing parts of the railway deemed unprofitable. Passengers flocked to the opening day of the railway and the train was soon overcrowded, but all eyes were on the tunnel at Totley. The second the train was plunged into darkness, the passengers heard several clicking of stopwatches, ready to record the time that it took to see daylight again. By many calculations, it was about 6.5 minutes. The 4 shafts were doing their jobs as the air was crisp and clean and the smoke didn't linger, and when the train emerged from the tunnel, passengers were greeted with rolling hills and stunning rivers. The local services ran from the 15th of June, allowing for last-minute touch-ups and changes from the inaugural day, and soon the 2 villages settled back into a new sense of normal. The workers had moved on to other projects, as had been done on countless occasions, but now the whole area was open up for the masses from the cities to commute and live in. There were a few complaints from the residents about the noise and the smoke, and by 1910 the railway had to address their drivers on the importance of being mindful around this area, but in general, all accepted the new railway. Totley Tunnel has remained virtually unchanged even today, and the line is regularly used just as it would have done 100 years ago. Interestingly, when a shaft was dug, a natural cavern was formed, so rather than cover it, the cavern was used in the construction and can be seen in the brickwork. It's an interesting tunnel, and now the 4th longest in the UK. Also what's interesting is above the tunnel, the spoil tips can still be seen, even with some leftover bricks are scattered around. The spoil tips are now mostly overgrown areas, but I do believe you can explore them. But many of the shafts, while open, are fenced off for safety. So if you're near Totley and unsure what to do, check out Totley more. You may find relics of the Hardships and the achievement that runs directly underneath your feet.